Alright, what's up guys? Today we're going to be talking about Redux and how to implement it with React. Alright, so I'm not going to lie to you, Redux is kind of a pain in the butt, but that's mainly just because it's a lot of boilerplate, okay? There's a lot of code that you have to write initially in order to set it up, but after it's set up, it's actually pretty easy to implement, right? So you can see I have a little React router and Redux boilerplate template right here on my GitHub. Just because, I don't feel like setting it up every time, right? But it's important to set it up from the start so that you understand what everything is and how to get it to work, so that when you are working with Redux in the future, you're not going to have any questions about where things are coming from. Okay. Uh, so Redux, a lot of people have a hard time with it, and I think it's actually much simpler than they give it credit for. I think people really just get bogged down with the terminology and just the amount of places that they have to look in order to get something to work. But I promise you, it's really actually not that bad. All right, guys. So what is Redux? Well, Redux is a state management tool. Okay. So you know how in our React applications, if we had application level state, well, the one problem with application level state is that if we had some state in our app.js file, and we needed it in a child component, well, we would have to pass that state as a prop to the child component, okay? But what if we have like nested child components? Like what if our child component has a child component that has a child component, okay? Well, what we would need to do in order to get that data all the way down there is we would have to pass it one by one down the state tree, okay? So that's kind of a pain in the butt to do, and it can take some time, and it's a pretty easy way to run into errors, right? If you have that many levels that you have to go through, there's a good chance you're going to make a mistake somewhere along the way. All right. So state management tools like Redux are here to solve that problem. Okay, and pretty much what it's going to do for us is it's going to allow us to have some application state that lives in this one place, and we can access that application state from anywhere in our application, and we don't have to pass anything down the prop tree. All right. So that's what Redux does. Let's kind of talk about how it works really quick, and then we're going to start writing some code. Okay. So what we have in Redux are really three main things that we got to worry about. All right. We have a store, which is where our data gets stored. Okay. We have reducers, which is where the logic of our data essentially gets modified, right? And the reason it's called a reducer is because it said it's like the reducer function. All right. I thought the name reducer was a little confusing, right? And then we have actions, right? Because it sounds like actions would be like doing something, but the reducer is where things actually happen to our data. Okay. And then actions are simply just payloads of data, right? It's how we get our data into a reducer, which is where some logical stuff happens to it, like we're just going to make a simple counter app, so you would like increment counter by 1 inside the reducer, and then it gets sent to the store. Okay, so let me show you this really quick, because that probably sounded weird. All right, I explained it like this one time, and I feel like this is a pretty easy to wrap your head around it, a pretty easy way. All right, so Redux has these three things, right? And there's a few things in between that have to happen in order to get them all to work, right? But the main thing is actions, reducers, and the store. Okay. Well, what is this when we actually think about it? Well, Redux is pretty much just a really complicated way of writing a function, right? So I want to give you this little example right now, and then it may not mean much right now, but then afterwards we'll come back and look at the example, and hopefully it's more meaningful after we've actually done everything. All right. So the way you can think about Redux is just like writing a regular JavaScript function. So let's just say function do something, okay, and then inside of here, what we're going to do is we're going to console.log a variable called something. All right, so we're going to actually pass that in right here into the parameter list, right? Okay, just a simple function, and then we can get this to do stuff for us by saying do something hello everyone, right? And then it'll console.log hello everyone. All right. So let's break this down, because if you ask me, Redux is just a very complicated way of writing a function, right? So what do we have here? Well, if we take a look at this parameter list, we're passing something in, right? We're passing in some data so that we can do something with it. Well, you can think of this as the action right here. That's it. That's the payload of data. Okay. And as you're going to see in Redux later, we also need to have action types, which are the name of the payload of data. Okay. So, you know, we could say the action type is do something, right? This would be an example of an action in Redux. We got a name of something and the data that it comes with. That's it, okay? Those are actions. Okay, so where would the reducer be? Well, the reducer would be inside of these curly braces right here, because in here, we're doing something with the data that we sent in. That's the reducer, all right? And then the store is just, I guess it's just this console.log window, right? We're doing something with our data, and then it's getting output right here, and that's where our data lives. Okay, you know, Redux does have a lot of boilerplate, but hopefully you're not going to let it feel too complicated, because when it comes down to it, if you ask me, it's nothing more than just a function, all right, with a lot more steps. Okay, so with that basic explanation out of the way, let me stop yapping your ear off, and let's actually start implementing it into an application. All right. All right, so let's get started. And let me not lie to you guys. I don't have all these steps memorized. I got my boilerplate application over here on the side that I'm referring to for notes. It's a lot of steps, all right? So don't feel like you need to memorize this. And like I said, it's a lot of steps. It's a lot of boilerplate initially, but after you have that boilerplate set up, it's really simple to implement this and get it to work in your application and pass state around really easily. Okay, so let's get started. Let's make a new React app. So I'm going to say npx create-react-app. Okay. Oh, I got to give it a name, obviously. Redux tutorial. All right. So yeah, I'm going to pause the video while this is loading up, and then I'll be back whenever this create React app template is done downloading its dependencies. Alright, so we got our happy hacking screen, so I'm just going to say npm start. I'm going to have to actually go into the folder that I made, actually. I can't run npm start in my desktop because that's not the React application. Okay, so npm start in the folder that we created, alright? And that's going to have create React app, get to work. Creating our new app right here. Alright, so let me open a new VS Code window while we wait on that. Alright, let me drag this folder onto the screen. Alright, and let's get cracking. Alright, so I'm just going to do some cleanup here. Let me get rid of test. I'm going to get rid of service worker, and I'm going to get rid of setup test. Okay, and then I'm going to go into index, get rid of the setup test lines, or the service worker lines, I should say. And then I'm going to come into this header component, and I'm going to get rid of all this stuff and just have an H1 that says Redux tutorial. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to make a simple like counter app that Redux is in charge of managing the application level state. And just so you know, you wouldn't really want to implement Redux for a very simple application that doesn't use like an insane amount of state. You know, a good example is if you have like a full stack application and you have a good amount of data moving throughout your application. When things get bigger, it makes Redux a good idea, but when you're on a small scale, it's definitely overkill. Okay, but in this situation, we're going to overkill this counter app we're creating just for the sake of simplicity and learning Redux. Okay, so yeah, we got our app.js file right here, and the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're actually going to have to install some packages. Okay, so let's go ahead and type npm I. All right, npm install. Let's see, what do we need here? We're going to need Redux. Okay, space. We're going to install multiple packages in one line. Redux dash thunk. All right, and I'll explain what that is later. And then we're going to need React dash Redux. Okay, should be those three: Redux, React Redux, and Redux thunk. All right. So those are going to start downloading. I'm going to pause and turn the video back on when it's done. Alright, it's done downloading. So let's start our server up again. npm start. And let's go ahead and let's go into our app.js file right here, and let's get started implementing Redux. Okay. So Redux needs to be the top level component of your application. Alright, and if you are including React Router in this as well, because you know React Router also has to be top level, Redux would actually go above React Router. So yeah, the Redux, pretty much the reason it has to be the top level component is because everybody needs to be able to get their state from this guy. All right, so if somebody is outside of that, you know, they're not going to be able to get any state. All right, so we always just put Redux at the top when we're implementing it. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this right here, because we're going to bring in some React Redux components to get started creating this boilerplate. Okay, so just hang on with me. There's a lot of boilerplate to get through, but the good news is that the boilerplate is exactly what it sounds like. It's boilerplate. All right, it never really changes too much. So you know, every time you implement this, you just kind of have to go through the motions. All right, and then when we get to the part where we're actually customizing stuff, you know, that's like the meat and potatoes. All right, but right now we're just doing the basic setup. All right, so what we're going to do, you guys, is we're going to import the Redux packages that we just downloaded. All right, so we're not going to need too much right here, but what we are going to do is we're going to import something from React-Redux. All right, and that something is going to be provider. My autocompleter is not working. I don't like when it doesn't work. It scares me. Let me try again. From React Redux. It's weird. Provider. Oh, there it goes. All right, cool. So we're going to import provider and some curly braces from React Redux. Okay. And then what we're going to do after that is we're going to use this provider component. All right. So the provider component essentially connects the Redux store to our React application. Okay. So what we're about to do right now is we're going to create a Redux store file, which is where all our data is going to live, and then we're going to create the reducer, which is where the logic happens, and then we're going to create the actions, which is how the data gets to the reducer for the logic to run, and then for it to ultimately live in the store. Okay, these files are separate from React, so what this provider component is doing is it's allowing us to connect our application to the store. All right, and there's going to be a few more React components that we have to do in order to finish the process of connecting. But yeah, this is the boilerplate, the early steps for it. All right, so this provider component is going to take a store prop. All right, and we're going to give it a variable name of store. All right. So what is this store right here? Well, this is a file that we have yet to create. All right. So we're going to be kind of doing things backwards. We're going to be setting things up and then creating them. All right. So just stay along with me. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to import store, which we haven't created yet, from /store. Okay. We're just going to make it all in this directory right here. Okay. And then inside of here, you know, let me just put like a H1 so we can actually see something on our page. Oops. Oh my goodness. I'm just having H1 in here. Hello. Alright, so our application is going to say, I can't find this store that you're talking about for this import, so let's go create that. Alright, so we're going to say new file, store.js, lowercase s actually, store.js. Alright, because this is not a React component, but it is a JavaScript file, so it's going to be a lowercase s. Okay. So what we're going to do in here is we're going to set up our store right now. Okay. So what we got to do is we have to import some stuff from Redux. All right. And that stuff that we're going to import is going to be create store, apply middleware, and compose. All right. We're going to see what those do in a second. We have a few more things to import though. We're going to have to import thunk from redux-thunk. Alright. And then we're going to import root reducer from /reducers. Okay. We're importing some functionality from the Redux packages on these two lines, and then right here we're importing this root reducer file, which we have yet to create. Alright, this is going to be the file that pretty much does all of our logic, all of our reducer logic, right? So the first two lines are going to be packages. This is a file that we haven't created yet. Okay, so it's going to break right now, but don't worry, we will create it in a moment. Alright, so the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create some initial state. Alright, and this is just because we have to give some initial state to the store, right? So what we're going to do is just give it an empty object right here. Alright, and then we're going to say const middleware equals thunk. Alright, so a Redux thunk is a function that returns another function, and we're going to use this as a middleware option for our create store configuration. Alright, so you don't need to worry too much about what this is doing right now. because we're not gonna see it in action until we finish setting up this boilerplate. So right now what we're going to do after all this is we're actually going to create the store. Alright, so we're going to make a variable called store. We're going to say const store equals create store. Alright, that's this function we got from Redux right here. Okay, and in here we need to give it a few things. We need to give it a root reducer, alright, which is essentially a file that all the logic goes through. Alright, so we'll give it this root reducer that we imported but we haven't created yet, but we will in a second. We need to give it some initial state. Alright, and then after that we need to give it any middleware that we want it to have. Alright, and the only important one that we're going to have is really this right here. Alright, so let me show you what it's going to look like. So we're going to say compose, alright, and we're going to say apply middleware, which we imported from Redux up here. And we're going to say the middleware that we want to apply is this middleware function, which has this Redux thunk right here. If you had other forms of middleware, you would put them in here, you know, like other packages you downloaded, like Redux persist, something else, but we're just going to use the Redux thunk. Okay, that's all we need for now. So apply middleware, and then we're going to say dot 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 middleware. Alright, that pretty much spreads everything out in this array. We really only have one thing, but if you had multiple, you would need to use the spread syntax. Alright, there's also something we can add here right now. I'm going to copy this line and I'm going to come back to it later. So this line right here allows us to use Redux DevTools, okay, which is a fancy little thing. Oh man, he opened up all the way over here. It's essentially a little window that will track all the functions and all the variables that are going on in Redux from our Chrome browser, okay? But I'm going to show you that after we finish everything, and if you were to add this in there right now without the Chrome extension being installed, it would break your application, and it would be kind of hard to debug because I don't think the error message is that friendly. Alright, but we created our store. Alright, that's the first big part of boilerplate that we had to get through. Alright, so now what we're going to do after this is we're going to create the root reducer, and then after that we're going to create our individual reducer file. Alright, and this is where all the logic happens for our very complex function. Alright, so that's coming up next. Alright, so we got our store created. That's where our state is going to live. This is going to be its home, right? But in order for it to get here, it's got to go through a few more steps. It has to be sent in the form of an action, alright, a payload of data, and that action has to get sent to a reducer, which is where the logic happens, which then gets fed into the store. And we can see that's happening with this line right here. We're going to create a root reducer file, and this store is going to use this root reducer file to get all of its data. Alright, so it kind of gets funneled in here, right? So let's go ahead and let's create the reducer files. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder inside of the source directory, and I'm going to call this reducers. Okay, and inside of this reducers file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an index.js, and this is going to be our root reducer. Alright, so if you take a look here, we're saying import root reducer from /reducers, which is this folder, and if you notice, we don't actually type /index.js, and the reason for that is that Node knows that when I don't know if it's Node or JavaScript, but basically when you give something an index.js file, that's a special file name basically saying, hey, I'm the main file of this directory. Alright, so when we just say import this folder, alright, what happens is it sees that there is an index.js file in here, and this is automatically going to get imported as like the default file. Alright, so yeah, okay, so let's go ahead and let's set up our root reducer. Alright, so there really isn't too much to put into here, but what we're going to do is we're going to import something from Redux. Alright, and that something is going to be combine reducers. Okay, I'll explain what this is in a second. And then I said we're making a counter app, so we're going to need a counter reducer. Okay, so let me write this out and then explain myself. Okay, so import counter reducer from /counter reducer. Okay, and we haven't created that file yet, but we will. Alright, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to export default combine reducers. Alright, and let's just say count is going to be whatever is returned from this counter reducer. Okay, so let me explain what this is. Okay, so with Redux, okay, you don't have to do it this way, but this is the way that people do it. Okay, so if you have many different types of data, it would get really clunky to have all of the logic for all of these random different data types in one file, right? So typically what people do is for each type of state or each type of, data that you have, let me just type rconst here, right? So if we had like count and we had like a user array and then we had like a is loading thing, all these things, right? What you would do with Redux is you would have a reducer file for each of them, right? Because you could potentially have like, 5, maybe 10 or more functions that could modify this state in a different way, right? So having one big ass file of all of that logic and all of those functions can get pretty clunky. Alright, so what people do is they break up these data types into their own files, their own reducer files, okay? And what they end up doing is they say, okay, in this root reducer, we're going to import all of the different reducer files for all of my data types, and we're going to combine them into one file, and this one file right here is fed to the Redux store. Okay, so it's kind of like a tedious step right now because we only have one data type, so there's probably not much of a point in combining any reducers when it's just one thing. But say we had like a user reducer, which is like an array of users or something like that, user reducer from /user reducer, right? If we had it like this, then we would for sure have to feed them into the store like this, user reducer, right? But since we just got one data type for this tutorial, we're just doing it like this, okay? So we're combining the reducers, and this part right here is going to be important, okay? We're saying count colon counter reducer. All right, so what this is doing right here, all right, is it's taking whatever gets returned from this reducer file. Okay, so we're going to have some data being returned from this reducer file. All right, and we're saying whatever this file returns, we're going to call it count in our store. Okay, and the names of these variables are going to be important later on when we are getting them from Redux, right? So if you have the wrong variable names, it's going to be hard for your application to work because stuff is going to be coming up as undefined Okay, and that's why the Redux dev tools are so helpful, because they help you out with that. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. All right, so we're going to come back to this right here when we're actually displaying stuff on the screen. Okay, so we got our root reducer file done. Not too much to look at here, so that's good. All right, and now what we're going to do is we're going to set up our counter reducer, right? Because we created one, but we didn't actually do anything with it. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's make a file inside of our reducer folder, and this is going to be called counterreducer.js. Okay, the lowercase c because it's not a React component. Okay, so what we got to do here. All right, let me explain to you the way the individual reducer files work for our different data types. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, actions can get sent to the reducer, and actions are just payloads of data, right, with a name and then the data that they need in order for logic to run in the reducer file. Well, the reducer file is just a big switch statement, or a big if else statement, right? Because we could have like a whole bunch of different functions in here. We're gonna have like increment counter, and we're gonna have decrement counter, and we could have like a reset counter function, right? So what we're gonna have in here is a big switch statement saying, hey, evaluate what function we're supposed to run right now. All right, so I said we could have like 3 functions: increment, decrement, and reset. Well, the switch statement first starts out by evaluating what function got sent to it. All right, and then after it figures out which code block to execute, at that point it will do some logic with the other data that was passed into the function. Okay, so what we're going to have to do here is a few things. What we can do right now is we can start by setting up that switch statement that I just talked about. All right, so let's export default. It's going to be a function. All right, and we're going to need, you know what, I forgot a step here. We're going to need some initial state, similar to how we did in our Redux store. Okay, we're going to need some initial state. So let's just say const initial state. All right, and let's actually give it some state this time. Let's say count is going to be 0. Okay, I know you're probably thinking, we have count here and we have count here. What gives? We'll talk about it later. Okay, when we're actually implementing this in our React application. Okay. So we're going to make some initial state. It's just going to be an object that has a count of 0, right? And in this function, we're going to use ES7 syntax, ES6, ES7. We're going to say state equals initial state. All right. So we have a prop right here, which we are setting to this object we just created by default. Okay. So we give it some initial state. And then it's also going to take an action. Okay. All right. So we got a little switch statement set up, right? And you're probably thinking, well, we need some cases, right? Because the way a switch statement works is, you know, it has a whole bunch of different things that it could run based off of which thing gets sent to it. That's true, right? As I mentioned before, we need to have actions that have the name and the data that they need to do their function. So in order to get this to work, we're going to have to kind of derail from creating this reducer file right here. And we're going to have to create some actions, all right? Because this reducer file is going to evaluate the action types or the names of the actions, which is basically like the name of a function. You remember when I said like function do something, right? The name of the function, right? That's pretty much like the action type. and then whatever we pass into the parameters right here, that's going to be the payload of the action, and together these things combine to create an action. But yeah, the switch statement here that we're about to create, he's going to need an action type to evaluate, all right, which is the name of the function. All right, so let's just set this up right here. Let's say switch on action.type, and then let's end it there, and let's go ahead and let's get ready to set up some of our actions. Okay, so actions are going to be payloads of data, and the way that we're going to set it up right now is that they're going to be like a template, right? We're going to say, hey, you're going to have this name, and you're going to have some data passed into you. Okay, so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to import something that we haven't created yet, but we will create it. So we're going to say import from, let's say import increment. Okay, we're going to make our increment function first. So increment from, we're going to come out one folder, and we're going to create an actions folder, and then we're going to create an action types folder. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to come into the source folder, and we're going to create a new folder called actions. Okay, so I'm saying, hey, I'm in the counter reducer file inside the reducers folder. I want to come out of here with // go into this actions folder and get this action types file. Okay, so let me create that action types file, action types.js. Okay, and cool. Okay, so we're going to come back to this switch statement in a second in our counter reducer, and what we're going to do right now is we're going to create our actions right here, or we're going to create our action types rather. All right, so that's coming up next. I just noticed I got an error right here. Okay, it's saying store does not contain an export default, so let's fix that. So I kind of spaced here. We created this store variable, but we never exported it, right? Because the app is saying, hey, I want this store variable from your store file, but we never said export default store. All right, because if we don't have this line right here, this guy ain't going to be able to get out of the file and become available to the app JS right there. Okay, so now it's going to give me another error. Reducer count return undefined during initialization. I'm pretty sure that's just because our switch statement isn't finished yet. So let's go ahead and let's just fix this. All we need right here in the switch statement is like a default return statement. All right. So what we're going to just do is say default return state. Okay. Now if we save that, okay, yeah, it's not yelling at us anymore. Okay. So I make mistakes too. My bad. All right. I'm human. So we left off. We created this switch statement right here, which is just returning some state, which is this initial state right here. And what we need to do is we need to start by creating our actions. Okay. So these actions, you guys, are going to be broken up into a couple of files. Okay. There's going to be the action types, which is a file of constant string values. All right, just a file of string variables that have the name of the actions or the name of the functions that are going to get sent to this reducer file right here. Okay, and we're also going to create an action creators file, which is in charge of building out these objects with the action types, right, with the names. So the reason we have to create an action types file where we just have a bunch of string variables is because we're going to use it in two places. We're going to use it in this counter reducer file, right, inside of the switch statement, and then we're also going to use it in the action creator file when we are creating these objects, which are just the payloads of data, right? So this is just to prevent from having a typo, and then if you change the name of one of your actions, you're only going to have to change it in one place, the place where the variables exist, the variable file. Alright, as opposed to coming in and changing it for every switch statement and every action creator you had. Alright, so let's go to this action types file we created, and in here all we're going to do is make some string variables. Super simple. So we're going to say const increment. Alright, and it's just convention to have this in all caps, right? So increment is going to be increment. Okay, so this string value is going to be the name of our function, right? It's going to be the action type. Okay, so the action is going to be an object. It's going to have an action type, which is going to be this string value right here, and then he's also going to have some data, most likely. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to come into our counter reducer, okay, and we're gonna make a case, okay, for the switch statement. All right, so we're gonna say case. I don't actually want that colon there. Case increment. All right, so we're saying if the increment action type was sent to us, then we're going to want to do something. Alright, so how about we just console.log action. Okay, and we'll see what this action is in a bit. Okay, alright, so now this root reducer, or this counter reducer, it has some initial state, and then it has something to look for. Alright, so it's basically saying if increment was sent in, which is this string right here, if this string gets sent in right here, okay, then we're just going to console.log the action, which, if you remember, is like the object that has the data in it, right? So we haven't actually created any actions yet, so let's do that right now. Okay, and so this console.log action might not make any sense right now, but after we create the actions and get something sent to the store, we're going to look at this console.log, and it should solidify a little bit more in your head what this action is. Okay, the name is a little misleading. It's called an action, but it's actually a bunch of data. It doesn't actually do anything. I don't know who named these things. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's go into our actions folder. Alright, and let's create a new file, and let's call this count actions. Okay, alright, so in here what the first thing we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to import this string right here. Okay, because it's gonna be part of the object. So as we can see, it's getting used by the reducer file, and it's going to get used in this action creator file. Okay, so it's good to just import it so that we avoid any typos and double work and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and import that guy. We want to import add to do, not add to do, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. We're going to want to import increment from action types. What's up with my autocomplete? I don't like when it doesn't autocomplete for me. Oh well, it's been bugging out lately. I'm sure it's fine. I hope. Alright, so what we're going to do right now is we are going to create a Redux thunk. Okay, so a Redux thunk is a function that returns another function. Okay, and I may have my terminology fucked up here, but what we're about to type right now is also an action creator. Okay, because we're going to create a function that is essentially going to create our action, which is an object with some data in it. And it's also going to be a Redux thunk. And the whole part of it being a Redux thunk is it allows it to get to the reducer, okay? So that probably doesn't make any sense at all. So let's just code it out and let's see how it works. All right. So we're going to make a function here. All right. We're going to say export function. Let's call this increment with lowercase letters. All right. And I don't think this guy is going to need to take any data at all. Okay. So what we're going to do is after this, we're going to return another function. All right. This is the Redux thunk part of a function that returns a function. All right. So what we're going to do here is we're going to return a function that has this prop of dispatch. Okay. I didn't say what this was before. Okay, but the dispatch is essentially what sends the action to the reducer file. Okay. All right. So the dispatch is in charge of sending this this object that's going to get to the reducer. Okay. So inside of this second function right here, what we're going to do is we're going to call dispatch, and we're going to pass to it an object. All right. And this object right here is going to be our action. Okay. So before, you know, there's a different way of doing it. Like you would write a function that creates like this object right here, and then you would write another function that calls dispatch with the object that you just created. I personally think it's easier to just do it in one function. All right. It may be a little bit less readable, but it's going to work, right? You're essentially just creating a function that returns an object and then calls dispatch on that object to send that object, aka the action, to the reducer, which is where the logic happens, which is where sorry, brain fart, which is where the modified state or data then gets sent to the store, and then the process is complete. Okay, so we're getting there. So as I mentioned, these actions are going to have two things. Okay, usually the first thing that they're going to need is an action type, right? That's the name, that's that string constant that we created earlier. Okay, so they're going to need a type, and the type is going to be increment. That's that string value that is just called increment that we saw. And then after this, you would send along with it any payload of data that you wanted. But I'm trying to think if we need any data to increment a counter or decrement it. I don't think we do. Well, we need to know what state currently is, but in terms of sending anything along with it, I don't actually think we'd need anything. All right. So this action is going to be fairly simple. Okay. All it's going to have is an action type. All right. That's pretty easy. So the workflow of this right now, right? We have created all this stuff, and you're probably thinking, well, what the heck are we going to do with it? Where's this going? This function right here, this increment function, all right, it's going to create an action, okay, and it's going to essentially send this action type to the reducer, and then in the reducer we're going to do some type of logic to modify this count and then send it to the store. Okay, so in order to call this function, what we have to do is we have to make this function available to one of our React components. Okay, and you might be thinking, hey, didn't we do that with the provider already? Well, this was connecting it to the store, and now we have some functions available in Redux that we want to use to modify the state. So there's just going to be a few more lines that's going to allow us to connect to the store, okay, and get these functions and get the state that exists in the store. Okay. Okay, so we created our action. Okay, now all we have to do is make this action available to one of our components so that we can pass it as an on-click prop. All right, so what's going to happen is when we click on a button, this function is going to run. It's going to call dispatch, and it's going to dispatch this action that we just created right here. And whenever you dispatch something in Redux, it goes to the reducer file. Okay, so this reducer file sees that it got an action.type of increment, and what it's going to do is it's just going to console.log action, which is this object that we created. Okay, so we're going to do that next, and you're going to kind of see how these things are coming together. All right, definitely a lot of boilerplate so far, but the good news is now that we're in a place to where all we really need to do is create one of these functions and write some logic if we want to be able to modify our state in a different way. All right, so we're going to see how we can do that in the next part. Okay. All right, so we did, oh man, so we did a whole bunch of stuff already, and now we're finally ready to start using these functions on Redux to modify our state. All right, so let's here's what I want to do. Let's just make a quick little page right here. I don't really feel like putting it in the app.js file, so let's make a page. Let's call this home.js. Okay, and let's just make a class-based component here, and then we're just gonna have an h1 that says hello, and then a little p tag, hi. Okay, what are you complaining about? Oh, duh, they need a parent element. So let me give it a React fragment here. Okay. All right, so let me import this into my app.js file. So I'm going to say import home from /home, and then I'll just display it right here. Home. All right. Cool. All right, so let's go into the home file, and in here we are going to connect this component to Redux. All right, and we're going to be able to get its functions and any state that it has. Okay, we're going to see how we can do that. So what we need to do is we need to import something from React Redux. All right, and that something is going to be the connect component. Okay, so let me get rid of this export default up here because the syntax for this is going to be a little different. Okay, all right, so what we're going to do is we're going to say export default home. All right, and what we need to do, you guys, is we need to come right before the home, and we need to use that connect that we just got from React Redux. Okay, so we're going to say connect. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pass to it a set of parentheses, and then after that set of parentheses we're going to put another set of parentheses around our component name. Okay, so in this first set of parentheses right here, we can pass a couple of things. All right, so what we can put in here is the ability to get the current state from Redux, and also any actions that we created in Redux. And as we saw, we have this function, this action creator function right here. Okay, so let's just start off by getting some state right here. Okay, so there's two things. There's map state to props, and there's map dispatch to props. Okay, and it sounds a little weird, but map state to props, what it pretty much does is it gets the Redux state and it makes it available to this component as a prop, right? So as we saw before, we have this count state right here. Well, after everything's said and done, we'll be able to access it by saying props.count. Okay, pretty simple. And then that thing that I mentioned earlier about these names right here, where this says count, and then in the store file, if I can find it, not in the store file, in the root reducer file, it says count right here as well. I'm gonna get to how this part works, right? So what we're gonna need to do to connect our home component to the store and get some state, all right, that's gonna be the first part, is we're gonna write a function, right? And this function is typically written like this: map state to props, and it's going to be an arrow function which takes state as a prop, all right? And then in here we are returning an object, all right? So parenthesis and then curly braces, all right? And then right here we're going to say what we want the name of this prop to be. So if I wanted it to be called Dingus, I would write Dingus right here. Okay, and then in order to get that state, I'm going to have to do a couple of things. I'm going to have to drill down. Okay, so to get it, I'm going to have to say state, and then the first place I have to look is in my root reducer file. Okay, I called this state count, right? So this is the first thing I need. All right, count. All right, so state.count. Okay, and then this count variable is pointing to this counter reducer file. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's take a look at that. Come on, move over. And then in here I called this state count. Okay, so in order to get this state in my home component, I would have to say state.count.count, and that might look a little confusing, but I will change these variable names around so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, in order to get this, we need to pass this function into this curly braces right here. Okay, so the way it works is it takes two parameters. The first one is any state that you want to get from Redux, and the second one is going to be any dispatches that you want to get from Redux, which is this function right here, right? We're going to be able to send this function. Okay, so right now all we want is the state, all right, just so we can display it on the screen. And for the second param, we'll just give it a property of null right here, saying we don't want nothing. Okay, so now this home component should have a prop of Dingus. All right. So let's take a look right here. Let's go ahead and inspect. Let's go to our components. We have this home component, and we have a prop of Dingus, which is set to 0. Okay, and the reason it's 0 is because in our counter reducer, that's what we initialized it to, 0. Okay, cool. So now if I just want to display this right here, I'll say current count is this.props.dingus. Okay, cool. And let's go back and look at our application. Current count is 0. Okay, cool. Not the fanciest thing in the world, but we're getting somewhere. Okay, we're finally getting somewhere. All right. So I want to show you how these variables work right here. So if I came into my root reducer and I called this count, LOL, it would now say can't read property of count undefined, because state is right here. It's pretty much referring to the Redux store, and then it goes into the root reducer. All right, and when it goes into the root reducer, it sees, okay, the first thing I have is count LOL. Okay, so what it's doing right now is it's looking for count, which doesn't actually exist. Okay, but if I change this to count LOL and I save it, now it works again. Okay, similarly with the counter reducer, if I made this like count fleeb, I don't know. Now, okay, so I change the state in the counter reducer from count to count fleeb, and then in my home component, I'm saying, okay, this dingus prop is going to be state.count LOL, which is coming from the variable name we gave in the root reducer file. Okay, and then we want the count property from that root reducer file. Okay, so the root reducer points to this counter reducer. Okay, so we go into that counter reducer, and we can see that we don't actually have count. We have count fleeb right here. So this is still going to show up, but it's just going to show up as undefined. All right. So if I go into my home component and I name this count fleeb, all right, we can see that the 0 comes back. So okay, that's how we can get some state from Redux. Okay, now the next step is going to be to send this action creator that we made earlier in order to modify the state of our application. Alright, so we're almost done. The next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to set up the dispatch. Alright, so what we had done was we created an action creator, alright, which is just a payload of data, right? We didn't actually need to send any data along with it, so the action creator just creates an object with this string value in here, right? And then when this gets sent to the reducer from dispatch, the root reducer will just console.log the action itself, alright? And what we're going to end up doing is like writing some logic in here. Okay, but for now we're just going to console.log it for testing purposes. So let's get this hooked up. Okay, so what we're going to do right here is we're going to create a button. Okay, and this button is going to say increment. Okay, and he needs to have an onClick prop. Well, this onClick prop is going to run that action creator that we made right here. All right. So it's going to make this object, it's going to call dispatch, and then it's going to get sent to the reducer. Alright? What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to import this action creator, and then we're going to have to map it to the prop right here. Okay? So what we have to do is say import. Alright? And then we're importing from, where is this file? We're in the home page, so we have to go into actions / count actions. Okay, and in this count actions file, we have this increment function. Okay, so right here, we're going to say increment. We want this function. Okay. The one bug I saw somebody have before is they didn't know the difference between exporting and export default. Okay, so since we're saying export right here, all right, we have to have some curly braces and say exactly what we want. But for example, this home component right here, it has an export default, right? Whereas the other one didn't have a default. It just said export. Right? When we have an export default, we can just simply say import the name from that file. Okay, so you're going to want to make sure that you have the correct syntax for this right here. Okay, so we imported this function, and the way we're going to connect it to our component's props is by coming into this second param. Okay. And what we need to do is give some curly braces all right? And then all we're going to have to do is just say the name of that function that we imported. So we're going to say increment. Okay, so if we save this right here, and then we take a look at our Chrome tools, all right, we can see we have this increment function as a prop in our home component. All right, awesome. So all we need to do is we need to use this increment function. All right. So let's go ahead and let's come to this button here. Let's give them an on-click property of increment. All right, and then we can't just say increment because it's available as a prop. So since we're in a class component, we need the this keyword and we need the props keyword, and then we can say increment. Okay, so we have our increment function. All right, so now when we click on increment, something breaks. All right, so let me pause the video and see what I did wrong, guys. I led you wrong. It said actions may not have an undefined type property. So I was thinking, what are you talking about? I got the type right here. It's increment. I'm importing it, all right, and then I'm also using it in the counter reducer file, right? But then if you remember, I was like, what the heck? My autocomplete isn't working. Well, when I went to this action types file, I noticed that I do not have an export here, all right? So this guy would never be able to leave this file, and that's why my my autocomplete wasn't working, all right? And as a result, everything was showing up as undefined, okay? So a big oops on my part, but hey, it happened to me, it could happen to you, and now you got an example of a bug, all right? I ain't gonna sugarcoat this thing. So I've been using Redux for a while, and even I make mistakes still, all right? Because there's a lot going on, all right? So now it should work, okay? So if we hit increment, all right, and we go to the console, we can see that it console.logs our action, okay, with the type of increment. Okay, cool. So we know that by doing this, okay, we're able to get our action creator from the file and map it to the component's props, okay, and then when we click it, we know that our action creator was created correctly because dispatch is getting called and it's making its way to the reducer right here, okay, and the reason that this is console.logging that action, which is the object, is because it goes into the switch statement of the reducer, which it just made it to from dispatch, right? And we have this switch statement right here. It says, okay, take a look at what action was sent, right? If it was increment, which is what we sent, you know, that was a part of the, that was the action type, okay? So it's saying, hey, take a look at the action type. If it's increment, then just console.log the action. And it showed up in our console, okay? A lot of steps, all right? Now the last thing we need to do is we need to write a function or some logic in this reducer file that's going to increment this count, okay? So how can we do that? Well, it's going to be very similar to how we would do this with React, okay? So we're going to have to create a new state object. We're not going to call this .setState though. What we're going to do is we're going to return a new object, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to say return, what I called it count_fleeb, okay? It's kind of weird, but okay. So count_fleeb is going to be state dot, what did I call it? Count_fleeb +1. Okay, so you know how before, if we were doing a counter app, we would say, hey, we want to call setState and overwrite this value with this .state whatever state currently is +1. Well, now we don't need the this keyword, so we're just saying, hey, take a look at state. State is like, okay, I am this initial state object right here. okay, and then we're saying, hey, add 1 to it, okay. So now if we save this, right, and you got to remember to maintain the rules that you do when you're modifying React state. You always have to provide a brand new object, and you never want to modify anything directly, all right, because that can lead to some data imbalances, okay. So let's take a look. So now if we hit increment, it goes up to 1, it goes up to 2, blah 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 blah, okay. Awesome. So we did it. We implemented Redux, okay. So tons of boilerplate. It's hard to learn just because there's so much stuff to remember, but if you code along with this and you create a GitHub repository for it, you're going to have an example. All right, so what we did was we created a provider that has access to a store prop, which points to this store file right here. Okay, and this provider component makes it so that everything inside of our application has access to the store if we use the connect component. Okay, so after that, we created our store file. This is all boilerplate. Okay, and then later on, we're going to talk about this this extension right here. That's going to give us the Redux dev tools. Okay, but this is all boilerplate, you know, just for setting up our store. And basically, what you need to know is we said, hey, we're going to use this root reducer file. Okay, well, the root reducer file is index.js inside of the reducers folder. All right, and then in here you would combine all of your different types of data. All right, since we only have one, we just did one. All right, and then after that, we created a counter reducer, which is a switch statement. Okay, this counter reducer is going to evaluate some action types right here, which is just a string constant. All right, and then it basically sets some default state. All right, and then it just waits for an action to get sent to it. All right, and if an action was sent to it that it recognizes, then it runs a specific code block. Okay, then we actually had to go and create those actions. Okay, so we created an count actions file. All right, and we called it count actions because it's for the count data type. All right, so we have a counter reducer and a counter actions file. Okay, and then what we did was we created this Redux thunk, which is a function that returns another function. Okay, so what this function does, it essentially calls dispatch, which is the way of sending an action to a store, the way of sending a payload of data to the reducer, I should say, not the store. Okay, so this calls dispatch. It sends the object that has the action type, and if we need any data, which we're going to do later, we'll see that as well. That's going to get sent as an object to the reducer, right? And then when it's in the reducer, we run some logic and the state updates, all right? And the way we get we get access to this functionality is with the connect statement right here, okay? So we say export default connect. The first part in here is going to be map state to props, all right? That's this function that we write. So the first part of it is the name of the prop, and then we have to say state dot whatever we had in our root reducer file dot whatever we had in our specific reducer file. Okay, so I called in my root reducer, I said count LOL. That's where that variable comes from, and then this points at the counter reducer, and I called it count fleeb. Okay, those are some weird names. I wouldn't expect you to name it that. Okay, it is just a demonstration. Okay, so then we put that as the first prop to the first param to the first set of parentheses after connect. All right, and then we have access to the state as a prop. All right, so we called it dingus. We can say this.props.dingus in order to get that count variable. Okay, after that, we would put any functions right here in order to modify the state. All right, so we imported our count actions function. Where is that? Right here. All right, remember, so this is what calls dispatch and creates the object. Okay, so we use that right here, we said, hey, the second param of this is going to be that function that we imported. And now we have access to this function as a prop, and we pass it to the onClick to modify our state. Okay. So that's pretty much it. I know it's it's a lot, but the good news is that after you get something simple like this, it's very easy to add more things. Okay. So what I'm going to do with the rest of the tutorial is I'm going to make another function, a decrement function, just so you can see how easy it is to create something new and add it to the functionality after all this boilerplate is in place. Okay, and then we're also going to make another function called a reset count. Okay, and we will actually pass some data into that. Okay, so it's just a very simple Redux application, but hopefully it's helping you get your mind around all the different components and how they all work together. Okay, so if you want to see the rest of it, stay tuned. If not, see ya. Alright, so with all that crazy boilerplate out of the way, okay, let's see how easy it is to just add a new function and to get it to work, right? So we don't have to set up any of this crazy boilerplate. All we would have to do now is just create a new function that we can use, okay? So what are we going to need here? Well, we're going to need a new action creator, we're going to need a new case in our reducer file, we're going to need a new action type, and then we're going to have to get this action creator in our component that's going to use it, okay? So let's see the steps for that, okay? So the place that I like to start is just in the reducer file right here, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new case, okay? And I'm going to say this case is going to be decrement, all right? And then what we're going to do here is we're just going to console.log the action that was sent to it, okay? So I'm pretty much just setting up a case here, you know, for our reducer file. And I'm going to go through the steps of getting everything to work, and then once it works, I'm going to simply just have this console.log test right here. Alright, and then the way I like to do it is that after I know everything's working, after I see this console.log statement, after that, then I would write the logic for the reducer case right here. Okay, so for the time being, just to test out, I'm just going to have console.log action. Okay. So I'm also going to need a new action type, okay? So we're going to come into our constants file, action types, and we're going to make a decrement one. So export const, I'm going to remember to export it this time, okay? So we're going to say decrement equals decrement, okay? This is going to make our counter go down, okay, instead of going up. Yeah. So we got our action type. The next thing would be to make a new action creator for this, okay? So this is what the this is going to be the payload of data that when we click on something, it's going to get sent to the reducer. This is the data that we're sending to our reducer file, or our logic file, if you will. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, what we're going to need is that action type again. So we're going to need decrement. All right, and we're going to say export function decrement. Okay, and this is going to be a Redux thunk and an action creator at the same time, I guess. So we're going to say export function. All right, and what we're going to do is we're going to dispatch this object that we are creating at the same time. Okay, so the type is just going to be decrement. Okay. And we're not going to need any data here, but we're going to make one that does need some data. You know, so I'll show you what that looks like after this function. Okay. So we got our case set up in the reducer. We got our action type created, and we got our action creator. Okay. Now the only thing we need to do is we need to make this available to a component that's going to use it. right? And we're pretty much just putting everything in this home.js file, okay? So we're going to have another button here that's going to say decrement, okay? And his onClick is going to use decrement. So what we're going to have to do is import that function we just created in this count actions file, this guy right here, okay? And then we're also going to have to make that available as a prop, right? So if we take a look right now in our Chrome tools, we can see that this home component has increment, it has dingus, which is not very descriptive. Okay, let's actually change this to count. That would make more sense. And then we're going to have to change this right here from dingus to count. Okay, so we have count and increment. Okay, dingus is gone. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make this function available to us as a prop. Okay, so we're going to do that right here by saying decrement. Okay, and now that function is available as a prop. Okay, so in order for this button to use it, he's going to need an onClick property. All right, and that onClick property is going to be that new prop that we just passed in, decrement. Okay, so everything should work when I click this decrement button. It's not going to do any logic to our state, but it should just console.log something. All right, so if I click it, it's not console.logging. Okay, that means something is going wrong. Okay, so let me make sure I saved everything. Okay, decrement. Okay. And then where is my counter reducer? Decrement is not defined in the counter reducer. Oh man. I was gonna do this, and then I remember when I was writing this case right here, I made a mental note. I was like, okay, I gotta import it too, but looks like I didn't do that. Silly me. Okay, so let's import this action type. It was saying it was undefined, and that's because we never brought it in, right? So when we're saying, hey, we have a case for this decrement right here, we never actually imported this variable name that we're checking for right here, okay, from the action types file. All right, but we did it now. So now I should see a console.log type decrement. Cool. Now all we got to do is write the logic, okay? And since it's a counter app, it should be fairly straightforward. So yeah, it should pretty much look like exactly the same one we did above. Alright, so we're going to return a new object. Alright, and count fleeb, which is a very weird name to call it, but that's what we're calling it, I guess. Should be whatever count fleeb currently is. So we're going to say state.countFleeb, alright, which points at the switch statement's state. Alright, sorry I had to pause the video there. Alright, so we're going to say state.countFleeb to get whatever state currently is, and then we're going to subtract 1 from it. Okay, so now if we take a look, increment and decrement, it's working just fine. Okay. So I think this would be a good chance to implement the Chrome dev tools, no, the Redux dev tools. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my store right here, and I'm going to uncomment this line right here. Okay, so let me quickly show you what we're going to do is look up Redux dev tools. Okay, it's a Chrome extension that we can install. Alright, and it allows us to pretty much use this debugger they have for us. Okay, so you're going to want to go to their GitHub right here. If I can copy it. After you install this extension, I already have it, so right here it says remove, but you would just click install. Alright, and they have instructions for how to get it set up. Okay, but I'll pretty much just walk you through it. You know, they have usage right here. What we got to do is we're going to get this line right here, which they have on their GitHub page right here. We're going to take this line right here and we're going to put it right after the middleware statement. So right here, we're going to paste this in. Okay. Now if we save, go back to our application, we should have this little icon up here. Alright, and if we click it, we can pretty much see everything that's going on in our application. So if we click at state, we can see we just have a little count fleeb right here. It has this count LOL variable that's coming from the root reducer, and this count fleeb is coming from the counter reducer. Okay, so those are the two variable names. You know, so if you needed to get it in your component, the home component, you would say state dot whatever these two variables are. Okay, and then we can see all of the functions that are run over here on the left. Right, so as I increment and decrement, we can look right here. It shows everything that happens. All right, and we can see how state changes in the diff. We can see the actions that are done, the state. All right, so it's going to be a really good debugging tool for you. All right, so I highly recommend installing that. Okay, and you can do some more research on, you know, pretty much what it does, but I think it's pretty straightforward. Just make sure that you only add this line after you have that Chrome extension installed, because if you don't have the Chrome extension installed, it will break your application. All right. So yeah, let's just do one more thing, and then this tutorial is done. Let's create a new action that is going to have some data. All right. So it's going to be an action with an action type and a payload. Okay. So let's see what that would look like. All right. So the last thing I want to do is I want to have like a little input box down here that is going to be a controlled input, right? And we can pretty much put the value, the number value that we want to change count to, and when we hit enter, it will change count to whatever we pass in. Okay, so that's going to require all the new Redux stuff that we just saw for the button, and then we're going to have some React controlled form. All right, so let's start with the React controlled form really fast. All right, I'm going to put a little break right here. All right, and in here I'm going to put an input type of number, and then I'm just going to have like a little button down here. Okay, change count. Change count. Okay. So yeah, not the prettiest thing in the world, but we'll see how that works. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make this controlled by React, a controlled input. So we're going to use the snippet rconst to get some state, and I'm going to go kind of fast here because I don't want to be here all night. I'm sure you don't either. All right, so we're going to say let's call this like number input, okay? And let's just set it to 0, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to set the value of this input to be this.state.number input, okay? Now if we go in here, we can't type anything, all right? And we're gonna, that means it's because we have to give it an onChange handler, okay? But we can see that we have some state here. We should have some state here. Oh, here it is. Number input is 0. Okay. So the next thing we have to do is we're going to have to make an onChange function. All right. So let's call this. Let's just call it handle change. All right. It's going to be an arrow function, which means we don't have to bind it to this component. And what we're going to do is we're going to say this.setState. All right, and we're going to need this event prop right here. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to say number input is going to be equal to event.target.value. Okay, so by passing this function to this input on click, or this onChange right here, onChange equals this dot handle change. All right, by giving this input, this onChange, which runs this function right here. Every time we update this input box, it's going to update our state. All right, so if I type 1 2 3 4 5, my component thing is sleeping on me. If I type a whole bunch of numbers here, we can see that our state gets updated. Okay, cool. So that's good. We got a controlled form. All right, that's as far as we're going to go for this for the time being. The next part is going to be to make the Redux functionality. Okay, so let's do it the same way we did before. So let's call this one case. Let's call this change count, I guess. All right, and all we're going to do is console.log something as a test. All right, for whenever we run it. So console.log the action. All right. So what we're going to have to do is create a new action type. So let me quickly import that before I forget. I'm going to say change count, and then I'm going to go into the action types and create a new constant. So export const change count equals change count. Okay, change count. Cool. All right, now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create a new action creator. Okay, so we're going to have to import that new constant that we just made, because he's going to be the action type. All right, so import change count, and then we're going to say export function change count. All right, and then we're going to return a function which is going to call dispatch right here. So we're going to say dispatch. All right, so we've seen this before. The type is going to be that constant change count, but it's also going to take a payload of data. All right, so we're going to say the payload is going to be we need to pass something into this function. So let's think about what we're going to do. Okay, so what we're going to do is whenever we click this submit button, we're going to take this input right here, this number we put in the input box, and we're going to let that be the payload of data to send along with the action. So if I change this to 500 and I click submit, I want to update count to be 500. Okay, so that's going to get passed in here. All right, so when we're creating our action creator, we need to kind of think a little bit in the future and figure out what is going to get passed into here as a parameter. All right, but we know just from thinking about it that we're going to need to pass in some sort of data, some number. So let's call this number to change to. All right, just to be super descriptive. All right, so you can call this whatever you want, but typically it's just easy to call it payload. For all of your actions that have data, just so you can always be like action.payload, and you're going to get the data that you need in your reducer. All right, it's just going to make things easy for you. Or it makes it easy for me at least. All right, so when we run this function, we're going to pass in a parameter, which is going to be the number that we want to change count to. All right, and then we're going to dispatch this action, which is just an object with some data in it. Okay. It's going to have an action type, which is the name of the function that's going to get ran in the reducer, and it's got a payload of data, which is the parameter that we pass in. Okay, and if that doesn't make sense, don't worry, because you're going to see how useful this console.log statement is in the reducer. All right, so we already have this right here, this change count. Okay, so it looks like we've got everything in place. All we got to do now is get this function in here, make it available as a prop, and then use it right here. All right. So let's bring that new function in. We got change count, and then we're also going to have to pass it as a prop down here. Okay. So now we have change count as a prop. All right. So as soon as we pass it in right here, you can see it doesn't exist. Whoa, I can't go forward. Change count. All right, doesn't exist, and now it does. Okay, So we're going to give that to this button right here. Okay, so on click is going to be this.props.change_count. Okay, and this guy needs a parameter. All right, and that parameter is going to be whatever this state currently is. Okay, so how do we get this variable from state? All right, and just to be explicit, we're passing in whatever has been typed in this input box right here. All right, so how do we access state? Well, this.state, and then we say whatever variable we want, number input. Okay, so this.state dot number input. Okay. So yeah, that's pretty much the function. So let's see if it's working the way we want. So if I type 555 and I run this action right here, I should be able to check my console. And it looked like it ran over and over again. What did I do here? This button has an on click. Oh, you know what I did wrong? Okay. I've mentioned this before, but when you're using onClick, okay, and you have a function that takes some parameters, it's going to call itself over and over again. So what you got to do is you got to preface that with an arrow function, right? So now we should be able to just say whatever we want, and then boom. All right. So I'm running this action, it's getting dispatched, and it's making it to the counter reducer file. And when we see this change count that comes in, this type of change count, all right, the case we have is to just console.log the action that was sent, which is this entire object right here. Okay, and we also have a payload of 555. All right, so all I want to do is just update state this count right here to be whatever we passed in. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, I want to return a new object, and the count fleeb property is now going to be whatever we just passed in. So how do we get that payload? Well, we got to get it through action, all right, which, if you remember, our console.log action is referring to this entire object right here. And the value is right here. So if we say action.payload, we're going to get 555 or whatever we send to it. Okay. And just to prove to you, if I console.log action.payload, all right, and I save that. So if I submit this, it'll say 0. If I change it to 5, it'll say 5. That's the action payload. Okay. That's the data that's coming in, right? Because we're passing it in right here, okay, when we call our function change count. All right. So yeah, let's go ahead and uncomment this out. We don't need this console log here anymore. And now we can see that when we hit 555 and we submit this, 555 gets updated. Cool. So I got a couple more minutes. So one last optimization we could do is whenever we submit this, we can empty this form out. So in order to do that, I think I would need to set up a new function. All right, so let's call this handle submit. All right, and this is going to be an arrow function. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste what we have right here. Okay, let's get rid of this guy as well. All right, so I'm going to copy and paste this right here, and then after this runs, what we want to do is empty out whatever is in state, set it to its default value, right? So in order to do that, all I got to do is say this dot set state, and I'm going to pass to it a new object. I'm going to say number input is now going to be 0. Okay, and then I'm going to say, hey, your on click is now going to be this dot handle submit. Okay, so I know I kind of flew through that, but this tutorial is insanely long anyway, so I don't think anyone's going to complain. Alright, cool, and then we can increment. Whoa! What's going on here? Was that right? Hold up. 7, 7, 7. Increment. What? Let me debug this. Hey, I found my goof. So for some reason, this state right here is showing up as a string value. So what I did was I casted it, right? And casting is basically making one data type a different data type. All right. So what I did, right, was I just came in here where it said this dot state dot input. I basically came into the handle submit. I said, hey, just so you know, you're going to be a number. All right, so I said number, and then I wrapped this guy in some parentheses. Okay, so that was just a little logic error on my part. And if you don't know how this works, don't worry, because I probably did the function wrong somewhere to where it was showing up that way. But you know, don't stress about it too much, because the point of this was to show you just how the Redux architecture works. All right, I suck at algorithms. I'm not gonna lie to you, and I think I just proved it to you. So yeah, that's pretty much Redux. We got actions, reducers, and the store. And pretty much all you need to know is that it's just a very complex way of writing a function, all right? And kind of just having a switch statement to figure out what function we want to run, all right? So that's my Redux tutorial in a very simple way. I hope it didn't confuse the crap out of you. And if it did, let me know, and I'll do my best to help out, all right?